So what do you think of when you hear the word innovation? Close your eyes for a second. And what do you see in your mind's eye when you think innovation? When you open your eyes, you're probably thinking about technology and technological advances over time. Many of us who have been in education for quite some time, we remember everything from those ditto machines to the copiers. Some of us are still recovering from that blue ink from the ditto machine. Remember that? I know I'm dating myself. But we've lived through the ditto machines to the copiers, from textbooks to laptops, even from overhead projectors to smartboards. And now we are into cloud computing, right? Because these are the systems that connect us, that connect our school system operations. These innovations are necessary. So we have our LMSs as well as our student information systems to make us better, to make us more efficient and more effective in the work that we do. And right now, we have artificial intelligence at our doorstep. And how are we going to be innovative and creative in using artificial intelligence in the teaching and learning process? And how can we use artificial intelligence to make us better in our operations so that we are more efficient and more effective? But I have a question for you. What do our employees, our teachers, our staff members hear when they hear innovation? When you come back from a conference, when you listen to a keynote, when you have a great idea, what do they hear? Are they running to you to say, I can't wait to implement that idea? Probably not. They're probably thinking, what is this new nonsense that this leader wants to do? And they're not being disrespectful, but there's some eye rolling that goes on because we've lived through, as educators, various innovations over time. And some have been implemented well, but some have been implemented not so well. When we don't have the why behind the what, that's when some of the eye rolling begins. And that's when some of our staff members start to say, well, what is this new thing that you want me to do? Because any type of innovation requires change. And it requires us to learn a new thing, to be creative, to implement something differently, to change our processes. And most of us don't like change, especially if it's change for the sake of change. So we need innovation. We do. We need to be innovative, especially right now as we're post-pandemic, right? We have problems that we have to solve, and we can't just admire the problems. We have to solve them. But there's a gap. There's a gap between the innovation and the perception of innovation. In that gap lies communication many times. There's a gap in communication. There's a gap in understanding. There's a gap in understanding the why behind the what. There's an enthusiasm gap. But I think we can close that gap. I think that we can come together through communication, and I'm going to talk about that as I go through my presentation today. We can solve the problems that are before us, and we have to be creative in this moment, and we have to be innovative. Many of us are working with and trying to handle and deal with chronic absenteeism, or the rise in student safety and discipline issues, or thinking about all of the ways that we can accelerate student performance and student learning. We have real issues at hand, so we have to be creative and innovative in our approach. So now is the time for us to be innovative. I want to talk about Miss Bird. Now, when I was an assistant superintendent, I worked with Miss Bird. She was an elementary principal, and she was very, very enthusiastic. Miss Bird was the type of principal who wanted to be the first of everything. She wanted to be on the cutting edge of educational innovations. She wanted the first of everything in her school. So at this point in time, this is when she wanted to put a makerspace in her school. And many of us remember the whole maker movement. So she changed a resource room, which also doubled as a computer lab. She changed that into a makerspace. And then she bought iPads for her students, and she asked her teachers to incorporate technology into their lessons. And she changed the master schedule to make sure that there was a rotation in the makerspace area, and she used that as kind of a special area. She changed the master schedule. Ooh. Those of us who are in education understand that the master schedule is the lifeblood of any school, not just high school, every school. But she went for it, and she did it. But she couldn't understand that after having all this enthusiasm around taking on this new innovation, why teacher morale was at an all-time low. Teacher morale started to erode and spiral downward. Now, year over year, her teacher attrition rates had already started to climb. But this particular year, when she got the intention forms back to say what teachers were going to do the next year, well, she realized that many of them had planned to exit. They wanted to transfer, or they wanted to leave education altogether. So she did different things to try to boost morale. She had potluck breakfasts and lunches and tried to include extra planning time for teachers to try to boost morale, but it wasn't working. So the weekend before Teacher Appreciation Week, she gathered up a bunch of pencils, she had ribbons. She spent that whole weekend tying these ribbons around bundles of pencils, and she gave them out the next day as a token, a small token, of her appreciation. To her dismay, as she walked her building that Monday afternoon, do you know what she saw? She saw some of those pencils in the trash can with the ribbons still attached. Well, you know, she was mortified. She was devastated. She was angry, upset, all the things. She called me. I went over there. We talked about it. And she said, I don't understand how people can be so mean-spirited. How can they be so cruel? Can't they see what we're trying to do here? I don't understand. And so I listened, and then I asked her, well, how involved have your teachers been in this new maker movement and the change in the schedule and the use of technology in the classroom? She said, what do you mean? I said, how involved have your teachers been in this maker movement and the innovations that you're trying to implement? And she had an aha moment. And she said, oh my gosh, I didn't include them. I said, right. You see, whenever we are at the forefront of something and we are excited about something as educational leaders, we want everyone around us to be excited. But if we don't take time to communicate and listen to the voices around us, then it will be like the pencils in the trash can. And we'll wonder why. And what she didn't realize, what she realized later, was that there was not curriculum to support that technology at that time. There was not yet a tie to the curriculum in that way. Her teachers weren't sure how to incorporate the technology into their daily lessons. They weren't quite sure where to go and what the makerspace was for. They didn't quite understand inquiry-based learning. All of the things that could have been wonderful for students, they were still learning and wondering about. And yet there wasn't the time or space or place for that. So it's important for us to make sure that we're bringing in those voices, because her teachers were having to create lessons that they weren't sure about, which increased their workload, which meant that they were burned out. And her teachers, now this was about a decade ago, they were not the only ones who were burned out. Our teachers today are burned out. According to a recent Gallup poll, K-12 teachers are the most burned out segment of the U.S. workforce. And that's important to keep in mind because according to the National Center for Educational Statistics, 44% of public schools reported vacancies last year. Now that was March of 2022 when that report came out. but the same holds true today. As a principal, I would pride myself on having a fully staffed building. I know that you have too, that we pride ourselves on having the people in place who are necessary to serve our students. So 44% of schools reporting vacancies tell us a whole lot about the state of education and how teachers are feeling right now. In fact, according to the National Center for Educational Statistics, there's been a 41% increase in the number of teachers who quit in June over the prior year. So again, we have to keep in mind that all of these voices, our teachers, our administrators, our staff members, have to be included. Now, I'm not saying that innovation is the only reason for teacher attrition, the lack of pay recognition or the lack of support, but the lack of teacher voice is also a contributing factor. Teachers want to be included in the decision-making process. They want to be at the forefront of innovation. They're serving our students, and they have the heart and the mind and the will to be able to do so, and they don't want to be left out of those important discussions. It's important for us to bring them in. And I think when it comes to innovation, we do have to pay attention to the cost of innovation and be willing to pay the cost of innovation. And by cost, I mean that literally and figuratively. So figuratively speaking, I'm speaking of courage, organizational discipline, structure, and tenacity. When I speak about courage, I'm talking about being able to realize who's involved in the innovation. Who's the innovation for? Webster says that an innovation means that it's a new method, a plan, or a new idea. Well, whose method, plan, or idea is this for? Is it for you? If it's only for you, then I call that an invention. You can go off and sell your thing to the shopping network, right? You can sell your idea, you can write about it, and that's okay. But if we really want an innovation and innovative ideas to be put into place that will create real organizational change, community change, change that will sustain over time, then that means that we have to include more voices in the decision-making process. And we have to have the courage to listen. Even when people don't agree with us, we have to have the courage to listen and realize who's involved in the innovation. That's tapping into the pain points that exist. And you know how when you're tapping into a pain point, that's when you know that you're on to something. So when you have the courage to listen, and then you're listening intently for those pain points, then you realize that we do have some commonalities, and you do also realize that through those pain points, pain moves people, right? And we know that we're on to something when we say to ourselves, there has to be a better way. There has to be an easier way. I'm frustrated by this. This doesn't make any sense to me. This is not working for my kids. I don't know what else to do. I'm at my wit's end. Now, we're frustrated in that moment, but that's the moment when we're on to something. That's the moment when innovation is ripe to set in. Because your question, your pain points, are the pain points of others as well. I've had a longtime mentor who taught me to lead through the 80-20 rule. And many of us consider the 80-20 rule when we think of the Pareto principle. And that's where 80% of the output is really determined by 20% of the input. So the funds that are raised at a PTA fundraiser, 80% of those funds are raised by 20% of the PTA members. My 80-20 rule is a little different than that. My 80-20 rule has to do with flexibility and the hill that we die on. So 80% of what people ask you about every day, you make thousands of decisions every day. That's the job. That's what we do. Those are the things that we can be flexible on for the most part, day in and day out. 80% of those things have to do with whether or not someone wants it here or there. They want it at this location or that location, on this agenda or that agenda, on this day or on that day. And we can be flexible on those kinds of decisions. They don't necessarily directly impact students in the classroom. These are the things that, again, we want our stakeholders to come closer to us, and we want them to know that they have been heard. But the 20%, well, that's the hill that we die on. That 20%, that's what we stand on. That's what we fight for. We have to know what's in our 20% in order to be effective leaders. Remember, if we're not sure of what's in our 20%, then we find ourselves just chasing anything that comes our way if we're not sure about what's in our 20%. In my 20%, I have equity in my 20%, hands down. I also have high quality content, highly effective instruction, highly effective daily instruction is in my 20%. Making sure that our students have what they need, that's in my 20%. Making sure that they have the benefit of authentic literacy that runs through the disciplines, that's in my 20%. That's the hill that I'm willing to die on. What's in your 20%? We need time for reflection. We need time to ask ourselves these critical questions about what's in our 20% so that we are not led to and from, that we know when to stand, we'll know what to fight for. And that means that our core will be aligned with our purpose. So it's important for us to recognize that, and it's important for us to recognize all that's in our 20%, but it's also important for us to know what's in their 20%. Now, who am I talking about when I say their, or when I'm talking about them? I'm talking about our teachers, our principals, our administrators, our community members, our higher ed partners, our business partners, our students. What's in their 20%? I guarantee you that if we take time to find out what's in their 20% and we come together and we put our collective 20% together, we will find what moves us, what we're irritated about. People will often ask, well, how are you gaining such momentum in a time where the world is so divided? Where we're so divided. How are you finding common ground? Well, this is how. We're getting together. We have the courage to listen to one another to find out what's in our common 20%. So for me, again, equity is in my 20%. Equity is also in my school board's 20%. Equity is also in my community's 20%. And when we have the courage to listen and we realize that we have some things that bother us, right? When we say that that's not right or there has to be an easier way, and we share those commonalities, well, now we have a starting point. That's our starting point. And from there, we can build momentum. From there, we can follow through. And this is how we get movement and momentum for our innovative ideas. There are impediments to innovation, however. And that's through the lack of follow-through, the lack of execution, right? You wonder why things are not going along. Well, because when we have in our mind that it has to be a certain way, and we're not flexible and we don't adjust and we're not following through, then that innovative idea will die on the vine. When I was a young girl, I learned how to roller skate. And what happens when you stand up on roller skates for the first time? You don't. You don't. There's a lot of falling and moving and scraping, and there are lots of bumps and bruises. And you're slipping and sliding, and you don't know what you're doing. But you have the commitment to try again and try again. Because when I was growing up, roller skating was kind of a rite of passage. There were roller skating parties, so I was committed. I said, I'm going to do this thing. And so I would stand up, and then you realize that after a while, you're standing, and then you realize that you can glide. You hold on to the rail for support, and you glide. And then, when you're really getting some confidence, what do? You learn to push, and push, and push, and push, and you glide. You might still stumble, but you make adjustments along the way. You watch what other people are doing. You're taking it all in, and you continue to try. You have the discipline to continue to try. You're committed to trying, and you push. And when you want to go a little farther, when you want to accelerate, what do? You push harder. You push harder. And when the rink gets a little crowded, what do? You glide to slow up. As educational leaders, we can learn a lesson from roller skating and those kinds of things, where the basics of to push and to know when to glide and to be committed to those times when we need to monitor to see what's happening. If we say we're going to meet at 3 o'clock on Wednesdays, we need to meet at 3 o'clock on Wednesdays. You know why? Because we have planning to do. We have adjustments to make. We need support. Sometimes we have to hold on. Sometimes we have to hold on to each other. And we have to have the discipline to be able to check in, the discipline to be able to check in on the program and on each other, on the innovation and on each other, on the technology and on each other. We have to have the discipline, which really just means the commitment and the willingness to be able to do that. We also need the structure, right? So it's one thing to have the courage to go out and to listen and to bring the voices in and to then to have the commitment, the organizational discipline. You have a plan in place. Okay, we're going to do this. We're going to make adjustments. We're going to design. We'll come back and monitor. But if we don't have the structure to support the innovation, again, it will be rejected and it will die. I love this season. It's football season. And I love football because in football, everyone has a role and everyone knows the goal, right? Everyone knows the goal. Everybody knows that that in football season, the Super Bowl is the goal. And everyone knows their role. I don't care if they're a quarterback or an offensive lineman or a trainer, right? They know their role and they know what their role does for the whole big picture, right? The role that they play has an impact on the big picture. And if a new play is introduced, what happens? They practice. They talk to one another. They collaborate. They design. They execute. And they practice on the field. And they run it back, and they watch the tape to see how they did. How did it go? So they have the structure where everyone knows what to do. In education, and as educational leaders, do our folks know what they are supposed to do to add to the bigger picture? How do we know that they know what to do? It requires us as educational leaders to check in. It requires us to set up the structure so that everyone knows their role and everyone knows the goal. The structure is critically important so that we can see the innovation through. And then we also have to have the tenacity. We have to have the patience to listen to those. I talked about the courage to listen. Sometimes when we're listening, we'll find that we have some opposing views. Opposition is good. I did not make a mistake. Opposition is good. I meant what I said. It doesn't feel good. Sometimes it just makes you mad. It just makes you angry because It doesn't feel good when someone is challenging us. But the one thing that we don't want as educational leaders, when we're trying to see an innovation through from beginning to the end, we don't need bobbleheads. I can buy one of those. We don't just need someone who will bobblehead us. If we have folks who are just wanting to bobblehead us, we're going to miss something. We're going to miss critical aspects of the innovation because we were not open to be challenged. And that will affect our students. What we're missing will impact our children. So we have to have the tenacity and the patience to listen, to lean in, to be available, to show up, even when we feel like retreating. It's important for us to show up because iron sharpens iron. So we can learn from each other, and I guarantee you that if we have the tenacity to sit in the discomfort and be respectful while we're sitting in the discomfort and really listen, we will gain momentum in the innovations that we, again, need so that we can close the gap between the innovation and the perception of the innovation. If we're careful to pay the cost of innovation, having the courage to listen, having the organizational discipline, setting up the structure, and having the patience and the tenacity to see it through, we will gain that momentum. All of these features are critically important. It's up to us as educational leaders to make sure that we are covering each and every one of these aspects and to make sure that those around us have a voice in this process. You know, we are building momentum in Roanoke City Public Schools, and I would be remiss if I didn't talk about it. And we are reaching our goals, and I'm really proud of the work that we're doing. We have an Equity in Action plan. And with our Equity in Action plan, we have 3 buildings that we are renovating in 3 years. The purpose of this is really to double our CTE seat capacity. So I realized after listening to our stakeholders, listening to the community, listening to our teachers, that when I started talking about equity and what was in my 20%, I realized that workforce development was in their 20%. Many of our students did not have access to career technical education courses. So now we are doubling our CTE seat capacity. When we had an opportunity as a school system to purchase the Roanoke Times newspaper building downtown, we did that. And the vacant middle school that was adjacent to one of our high schools where there was a lack of CTE courses, that building used to house central office staff. And those central office staff members moved downtown. And we are currently renovating that old middle school to be our Charles W. Day Technical Education Center, where we're doubling our CTE seat capacity. We're going to offer barbering and culinary arts and welding and criminal justice, or what we like to call innovative public safety, landscaping. We have lots of career options for our students. We have lots of college options for our students as well. But we knew that there was a gap in this area. So the innovative idea was to double CTE seat capacity. And then when we came to the perception of the innovation, well, the perception has been wonderful. Because our community, our teachers, our students have been involved in the process. And at the forefront, they said that workforce development is important. And we need more opportunities for our students. So we're starting this fall. We're already starting. Our 9th graders are starting already, and we are finishing up those renovations to that former middle school. And for those of us who are in the central office building that we're in currently, Well, that central office building will eventually become a community empowerment and education center, where we will have a welcome center for all of our families, particularly for our immigrant families. We'll have a parent and guardian university. We'll offer GED courses for our family members, because we know when you support the family, you support the students in the family, naturally. So we're excited about these new innovative ideas. And at the same time, by doing all of that, we are able to move central office downtown and streamline our processes so that everyone knows their role and the goal. This is just a quick look of what that middle school will look like that we're just so incredibly excited about. And again, this comes at a cost. We have to have the courage to listen. We have to be committed to the organizational discipline to see it through. We have to have the structure so that everyone knows their role and the goal. And we have to have the tenacity and patience to see it through. So I'll ask you again, what do you think of when you hear the word innovation? Thank you.